Our next presenter is Dr. Milos Markis. Milos is the Vice President of Aviserve LLC, and Dr. Markis' presentation today is entitled REO, the latest surveillance information. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Markis.
Thank you, Gary. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining in this morning. And I just want to say a big thank you to Jack and Sandy Rosenberger of Aviserve. Also, none of the stuff that I'm presenting today would be possible without them. So I will begin my presentation with a brief introduction to reovirus, and then I will talk about several reovirus-associated diseases, primarily viral arthritis tenosynovitis and viral enteritis and neuropathy in chickens. Then I will explain how we characterize reovirus field isolates in Aviserve, show you the incidence and distribution of reovirus in the United States, and talk about the evolution of reovirus serotypes. Reovirus, also known as orthoreovirus, is from family Reoviridae. It's a non-enveloped virus with a double capsid, so it's highly resistant to various forms of inactivation. The genome consists of 10 double-stranded RNA segments, and when multiple reoviruses infect the same cells in the chicken, those segments can be exchanged between the viruses, so the progeny can actually be different antigenically and pathotype-wise than the either parent virus, very similar to what we see with influenza virus. Reoviruses are ubiquitous in most poultry operations, but most of the reoviruses are relatively apathogenic. They're commonly found in the intestines, respiratory tract, and bursa of normal birds. Reoviruses can be transmitted vertically from hen to progeny and horizontally among birds. We primarily manage disease through breeder vaccination, and this mutes reovirus transmission to progeny and also passes maternal antibodies that protect progeny during the early few weeks of life. Several diseases are associated with reovirus infections. Arthritis tenosynovitis and enteritis are two predominant diseases and most economically significant reovirus-associated diseases in poultry. But reoviruses can affect heart, liver, spleen, and lymphoid tissues. And the combinations of any of those will depend on how pathogenic reovirus is. So more pathogenic viruses will be more invasive and able to affect more tissues within a bird. The clinical presentation of viral arthritis tenosynovitis is that of splayed legs and reluctance to walk and often uneven growth. Swollen shanks, which you can see in the top two pictures, are easily seen in the birds. And when you cut those shanks open, the tendons are usually fibrous and scarred with a lot of edema around them. And we also see excessive synovial fluids in the hock joints. The clinical presentation of viral enteritis and neuropathy is huddling of the birds, feed passage, and loose feces, which then can result in wet litter in the houses. The birds are very uneven and undersized. The picture in the middle is of birds within a flock of all same age, and you can see how uneven sized they are. When you necropsy those birds, the intestines are often pale and thin-walled with constrictions and ballooning. The ceca can be yellow, gaseous, and elongated. And the mortality can range, and it all depends on the house conditions as well as the presence of adventitious secondary infections. This graph summarizes the total submissions of legs and intestines that we've received starting in 2018. The leg submissions are in light blue, and the dark blue is reovirus positive legs, and then the intestinal submissions are in the light red, and the dark red is reovirus positive intestinal submissions. You can see from 2018, there was an increase in leg submissions, but reovirus isolations from the legs have remained pretty consistent. But there was this quite large increase in 2020 of intestinal submissions and reovirus isolations from the intestines. The 2021 numbers are only through April, but the pattern seems like it's going to be similar to 2020. We received leg intestinal submissions from all major broiler producing states in the United States. Again, leg submissions are in blue and intestinal submissions are in red. And we see that there is no geographical difference between the two sample types, as expected. So in 2019, it was similar, 2020, and then so far in 2021. Once we isolate reoviruses from the field samples, we characterize them in several ways. We evaluate pathogenicity by inoculating one-day-old chicks by the footpad and oral intratracheal routes. The footpads are then assessed for inflammation, which is indicative of reovirus being able to induce or cause viral arthritis tenosynovitis. And then at necropsy, we weigh the birds to evaluate their body weight gains and also to evaluate systemic infection and invasiveness of the reovirus. So does it affect the intestines, the liver, the heart, and so on. The antigenic evaluation or serotyping is done with virus neutralization assay with 4E polyclonal antisera, and we group the reoviruses into serogroups based on the matching neutralization pattern. Genome sequence analysis or genomic evaluations, but the sigma C genotyping does not correlate with the serotype. And so this characterization way is not as useful in selecting autogenous vaccine isolates. So we focus on picking isolates that are pathogenic, they're antigenically different from the conventional vaccine virus, and isolates that will grow well in vitro so that we can produce vaccines. Based on pathogenicity assessments of recent reovirus isolates, the reoviruses isolated from legs tend to be more pathogenic than reoviruses isolated from the intestines. However, both can cause arthritis, tenosynovitis, and enteritis. So the leg isolates can affect intestines, and intestinal viruses can cause footpad inflammation as well. Co-infections with astrovirus are common in intestinal samples, and enteritis is exacerbated with concomitant infections with astrovirus. Reovirus serotypes continue to evolve over time. Prior to 2011, we had primarily one serotype called S1133 that was associated with viral arthritis, and all vaccines belong to this serotype. Between 2011 and 2014, the reoviruses that we were isolating from the legs were grouped into 3 variant serogroups. And then in 2014, the variant reoviruses were isolated that had additional epitopes. And we were grouping these isolates in 5 different serogroups. The recent variant reoviruses exhibit additional antigenic heterogeneity, and I think genetic reassortment and mutation in the field can result in creation of these antigenic variants. So starting in 2011, we were grouping reoviruses into serotype 1, 2, and 3, and about 2014, we identified isolates that were still reacting with the antisera made for serotype 1, 2, and 3, but they were additionally reacting with antisera made against this PA4455 isolate. So this is what we call, this is how we refer to the virus picking up an additional epitope. So it's still belonging to serotype 1, 2, and 3, but different than those viruses, it was picking up this secondary PA4455. We have identified isolates that were reacting with CVRC antisera, and then occasionally we isolate viruses that react in the virus neutralization assay with S1133. And many times these isolates come from companies that will use live S1133 vaccine in the field, and probably a result of reassortment between the vaccine virus and the challenge virus. More recently, we have been detecting more epitopes for serotype 3974, 11P, and MM in various conformations. And it's worth noting that 11P and MM are the original Runting-Stunting syndrome isolates, or isolates associated with Runting-Stunting syndrome from the early 2000s. There are viruses that are neutralized by multiple anti-sera and don't belong to any particular sera group, so we call those isolates as multiple. And then there are viruses that are not neutralized by the available anti-sera, and we call those untypable. So in summary, viral arthritis tenosynovitis continues to affect broiler industry. There's an increased incidence of enteric disease since 2020, and it's usually a mixed infection with astrovirus. Certain reovirus serotypes continue to persist, but antigenicity continues to evolve over time. And genetic reassortment mutations likely drive this antigenic evolution, so it's important to limit reovirus replication and dissemination in the field. Thank you, and this is my contact information if there are any additional questions later on.
Thank you, Dr. Markis.